Hi there. So today I'm going to show you how to create a basic implementation of the game Tic Tac Toe using Phaser 3. So this is part of our Phaser 3 prototyping series. So the goal of the series is to just create a very basic implementation to get the high level idea of the game down and the basic gameplay elements. And then you would take that game further on your own and enhance it to create a full-fledged game. So on the screen here, you can see an example of what we're going to be building. So we're going to create a very basic implementation where we'll draw some rectangles, our sprites, and we'll allow players to interact with them. And ideally, if someone gets a tic-tac-toe, we'll display who won the game, and then they can refresh the game and play again. So to get started, we need to go ahead and download a new instance of our basic Phaser 3 TypeScript template. So in the description of this video, there'll be a link to this template, and you should be able to download it from. So previously, I shared a video that walked through the project template, and I discussed how we will be using this project template in the video series, creating game prototypes with the Phaser 3 framework. I'll be sharing a link to that video on the screen now, and in this video, I cover where the project template file is located on GitHub, how you can download and then set up the project locally, how you can install them project dependencies and then run the project locally, and then view the Phaser 3 game on a local dev server. We then reviewed the project structure, and we talked through the underlying code that makes up the basic Phaser 3 game. If you're interested in learning more, I definitely recommend checking out that video now. All right, so before we dive into the code, we're going to go ahead and just review what we'll be covering in this video. To create our tic-tac-toe prototype, the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and download and set up our project template. We're going to go ahead then and update our game configuration to match the output that we want for our Phaser 3 game. We're going to go ahead and load in our assets. Then we're going to start updating how our game looks visually. So we won't be doing any of the logic tied to the actual gameplay. Instead, we'll be focused on drawing out the game pieces and the game board and just getting a feel for what that looks like. We'll then add in some basic logic for allowing the player to interact with our game pieces, so our Phaser 3 game objects, and we'll toggle the frames on our game objects. Once we have this basic functionality down, this will be pretty much how the players would interact with the game. We'll actually start building out the logic for the tic-tac-toe game, and so we'll do this in a separate class, so that way it's reusable and we can use it in other projects. And then, once we have our basic class functionality down, we'll start adding in the actual logic for allowing players to make a move, checking if someone won the game, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up by adding in getters to our class, so that way our Phaser 3 game instance can get references to the data that's in this class, and we'll use it there. And then finally, we'll wrap everything up by go ahead and connecting everything together, so our Phaser 3 scene will be connected to our tic-tac-toe class, and we should be able to play a simple game of tic-tac-toe. All right, so to get started, the first thing we need to do is go ahead and set up our project template. So if you go ahead and download the project folder and extract that files and open it in your IDE of choice, for this video, I'll be using VS Code. We'll go ahead and start from there. So in the project structure, we should just have a very basic index.html page. In our source folder, this will have our main code. This will have our basic Phaser 3 configuration. So the first thing we want to do is we need to install our project dependencies. So what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and open up our terminal. I'm going to do yarn install. You can also use npm. So you just do npm run install, and this should go through and install our project dependencies. Once that is done, you can go ahead and do yarn start or npm run start. And what this will do is it's going to go ahead and start the local dev server, and you should be able to go ahead and view your project in the browser. So if we go ahead and open that, we should see a basic Phaser 3 game with our canvas element, with our default size right now, and just with this dark gray. So not much happening, but our project is up and running locally. All right, so now that we've went ahead and set up our project and we have it running, next thing we're going to do is go ahead and update our game configuration. So to do that, first we're going to start in our main.ts file. So at the bottom of the file, this is where we have our Phaser 3 configuration, and we currently have our canvas element being created with a width of 800 pixels and a height of 600 pixels. For our game, we want something a little bit smaller, so what we're going to do is we're going to change this to 480 pixels by 640. We're also going to go ahead and update our background color, so we're going to do D3, D3, D3. Go ahead and save. We'll see right away our game is refreshed and our canvas element is resized, and we have this little bit lighter gray color. Next, what we want to do is come into our index.html file. We'll go ahead and update our title for our page. So we're just going to do Phaser 3, and we'll do Tic Tac Toe. Then we're going to go ahead and update some of the CSS. So we have our margin, height, width. We'll keep overflow, our background color. And then what we'll do is we're just going to go ahead and use Flexbox to go ahead and auto center our canvas element. So to do this, we'll just go ahead and add the display property. And we are going to do flex. And then we'll add our flex direction. We'll do column. We'll do align items. We'll do center. And then we'll do justify content. And we'll also do center. So go ahead and save. Our canvas element should be repositioned, but it's not centered in our page. So if we come back to our main.ts file, we'll just go ahead and tweak some of our settings here. So we have typed. Let's go ahead and get rid of the auto center on our configuration. Go ahead and save. And now our canvas element is centered in our page. And if we resize, it should move accordingly. All right, and that takes care of updating our game configuration. All right, so next, what we need to do is we need to go ahead and load in our assets. So for our game, we're going to have one simple image. This is going to be a simple sprite sheet that has 3 frames that we'll be using for our Tic Tac Toe game. So it's going to have our red X and a green circle, and then just a gray background to represent where a player can click on our board. So in the description of this video, there'll be a link to this image. So if you go here, what you can do is you can right click on the image and do save image as, or if you come to the little menu, you can do download, and then this will go ahead and download the PNG. Once you have that PNG locally, what you'll want to do is come into your project. We'll place that in the public assets images folder, and we'll just call it blocks.png. Once we have that, what we'll do is we'll come into our main.ts file. We'll come to our preload method in our game class. And so this is where we're going to load in all of the assets that will be needed for our game. So it's going to be this one image. And then so what we'll do is we'll replace this. We'll do this dot load sprite sheet. And so for our sprite sheet, we need to provide a key. So this will be the unique identifier for this file. And we'll reference this when we create our game objects if we want to use this sprite sheet or image. So we're just going to call this sprite asset key. Then we need to go ahead and specify the path to where our file is located. So this will be located under assets, images, and then blocks.png. Then we need to provide our configuration for our frames. So this will be our frame width and frame height, and this is what tells Phaser how to break up that image into multiple frames. So if we don't provide this and we just try to load the image, we would show all 4 pieces of the image. And if we didn't provide the right configuration, then when we display the frame from our image, it wouldn't display the full sprite we're trying to show. So for our game, we'll have a frame width. It's going to be 16, and we'll have a frame height, and this will also be 16. So now that we've loaded in our sprite sheet, we'll go ahead and just create a basic game object to make sure everything's working correctly. So what we'll do is in our create method, we're going to go ahead and do this.add, and we're going to add an image. And so for our image, this will create an image game object. And so we need to specify the X and Y position of where we would like this game object to be placed. So I'm just going to do 50 and then 50. Then we need to specify the name of the asset that we are using. So this will be this sprite asset key that we used here. And then we need to specify the frame. So if we don't specify one, by default, Phaser is going to use the first frame, so index 0. And so if we go ahead and do this and we save, we'll see our red X is shown. Versus if we specify frame 1, we'll have our green circle, and frame 2, we'll have the gray. But finally, frame 3, there was nothing in the image, so it's transparent, so it's showing a game object, we just cannot see it. Alright, so one other thing I would like to do is when I load in my assets, I like to put this string into a variable since we reference it in multiple locations. And then that way, if we need to change that string value, we only have to do it in one spot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new variable. We'll do const sprite asset key, and we'll set it equal to that string. For this variable, we'll go ahead and pass this in instead of the string. There we go. And then nothing changes in our code. And then this is just nice so that way, like I said, if we want to change the string's name, or if we need to reference this in multiple spots, if we're creating multiple game objects with the same key, then we only have to do this in one location. All right, and so now we've went ahead and loaded in our assets. All right, so now that we have our assets, what we're going to do is we're going to work on drawing out our game board. So for our game board, what we're going to have is we're going to have some lines that'll be separating the various areas that players can interact with the game. And we're going to have the title of our game. So we'll just say Tic Tac Toe. And then at the bottom of our game board, we'll display which player's turn it is. So the first thing we'll do is we'll go ahead and load in our, we'll add in our text game objects for the top and the bottom of our game. So what we'll do is in our create method, we're going to go ahead, we'll do this.add.text. And what this will do is it'll create a text game object. And so for our text game object, we need to specify our location, our coordinate of where we would like the game object to be placed. So this will be our X and Y values. So we'll do 240 pixels by 50 pixels. And then we provide the text string that we would like to be shown on our game object. So we're just going to do Tic Tac Toe. And then we can provide a configuration object for our text style. So this allows us to do things like provide a color we like to show, the font family, and the font size. And if you don't provide this, then Phaser by default will go ahead and apply its own default styles. And so you'll see here, we end up with this text game object with the white text and a smaller font. So what we'll do is inside our object, we're going to do color, we're going to do purple. Then we'll go ahead and set our font family. So for our font family, we're going to use Verdana. And then we're going to go ahead and set our font size. And we'll go ahead and do 42 pixels. All right, so one thing we want to do is we want to change where our game object is being positioned in our game. So one thing to note is about text game objects, our origin for our game object is actually the top left. So when we go to place a game object, Phaser uses that origin for where to place that game object's location. So that's why it's being placed here. Since we specified that 240 pixels, that's halfway across our canvas element and then 50 pixels down. If we wanted our game origin to be in the center, so then that way this A would be centered here, that would have the text like this. And that's what we're trying to do. So an easy way to do that is we can use the set origin method on our game object, and this allows us to specify an X and Y position, or we can provide one value and Phaser will apply it to both the X and Y. And so now this gives us the result that I was looking for. So one thing to note is most game objects will have that origin in the middle, so 0.5, but the text game objects will have that in 0, 0. So now that we have our text game object up here, we're just going to go ahead and place our player's turn text object down at the bottom. So we're just going to go ahead and copy this code block, paste that here. And for our text, we're just going to do X turn. And for our positioning, we'll do 240. We'll do 600 for our Y coordinate. We'll do black for our color. We'll keep the same font family, but then we'll change this to 22 pixels, so it's a little bit smaller. Now we have that down here. All right, so to go ahead and draw the lines on our game board, we're going to go ahead and use a Phaser graphics game object. So to do that, we'll do this. Actually, we'll make a variable. So we'll do const. We'll call it graphics. We'll set this equal to this.add.graphics. And what this will do is it's going to create a new graphics game object. And by default, Phaser won't render anything to your canvas. We actually need to instruct that game object on where we want to draw and how we want to draw. So this could be as simple as drawing a black line between two coordinates, or you can apply styling so then that we control the size and the color. And so to do this, we'll reference our game object. So we have graphics. And the first thing we'll do is we're going to use line style. And this allows us to specify the line style that we want to draw with. So there'll be the line width and then the color, and you can also provide alpha. So we're just going to go ahead and do 12 for a line width, and we'll do 0, X, and then 3E, 3E, 3E for our color. Then we're going to go ahead and use line between to draw a line between two coordinates on our canvas. So we're going to do graphics, line between, and then we need to provide our X and Y value for the starting coordinate, and then our X and Y value for the ending coordinate. So we're going to do 170 pixels by 120 pixels, 170 pixels by 540 pixels. And so this will result in a vertical line being drawn onto our canvas element. So because we kept the same X position and we only changed the Y value, that resulted in a straight line, versus if we did something like this, we get a diagonal line. So then what we need to do is just draw another line separating our columns. So go ahead and copy this line here, paste it here. Then we'll go ahead and just change our X coordinate. Instead of 170, we'll do 314 by 314. All right, and now we just need to draw our horizontal lines. So go ahead and paste. Go ahead and copy that line and paste. What we'll do is we're going to change this to 30 pixels by 258. And then for our X position, we're going to go to 450. And we'll keep our same Y position, so 258. And now we have our first horizontal line separating our rows. So we'll go ahead and copy that. Paste this here. And now we just need to change our Y value to have it move down. So we'll do 402 pixels by 402. So for all of these values, basically what I'm doing is we're just taking our available game space here, and we're leaving some margin and padding around where our game object is going to be placed, and then this will be the area that a player can click to go ahead and interact with our Tic Tac Toe game. And then what we'll do is we're going to take our game object, and we're going to render it here, and we're going to scale that up. All right, and so now we have our basic board set up. All right, so next we're going to work on drawing out our game pieces to our board. So what we're going to do is we'll come up to our code, and we're going to go ahead and update this image game object to be positioned in our first spot here on our tic-tac-toe board. So if we think of this as like an X, Y coordinates, this would be 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, and then 1, 0, and so on and so forth. So to position this in our position of 0, 0, what we're going to need to do is update our X and Y position for our game object. So right now we're positioning at 50 for our X, so we're good there, but we need to move our game object down. So we're going to do 140 pixels. And so now we have our game object in the right spot, but we need to scale it up. So to scale up our game objects, what we can do is use the set scale method. And this allows us to provide a X and Y value to scale accordingly. Or we can provide one value, and Phaser will scale both the X and Y dimensions based on that value. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale this by 6. And so now our game object is scaled up, but it's not where we want it to be. So our coordinate for our game object, remember, is the middle of the game object, so 0.5. And so Phaser is rendering the game object accordingly, but I actually want my origin to be the top left corner. So we'll go ahead and use set origin again, and we're going to specify 0 for that value. And now we have our game object where we want it to be. So now that we've created our first game object here, we actually need to fill in the rest of our row, and then also all of our columns here. So to do that, we're going to take this logic, and we're going to move it into a new method for our class. So what we'll do is we'll come below our create method, and we're going to add in a new method, and we'll make it private. So we'll do add game piece, and this will not return anything. And we'll go ahead and just place this here. So then what we'll do is we're just going to go ahead and call that method. And that way our game object is still shown. So in order to make this method reusable, what we'll need to do is we'll need to abstract away some of our parameters here. So we're going to need to dynamically calculate our X and Y value based on the position of where we want our game object to be placed at. So like right here, 0, 0. So in theory, we would just want to use our 50 and our 140, versus if our game object was here, 0, 1, we'd want to update our X position for our game object. Versus if it's down here, we want to update our Y position based on that coordinate. So what we'll do is we'll add 2 arguments, and we'll expect both of these to be numbers. So we'll have our X and our Y for our coordinates. And then we will calculate our X and Y position based on these values. We'll make 2 variables. We'll have X position, set this equal to 50 for now. We'll have const Y position, we'll set that to 140. And then we're just going to pass these into our game object here. And now we'll use our coordinates to calculate what this should be. So I'm just going to do 0, 0. So to calculate our X position, what we need to do is we're going to start at position 50, and then we need to move over based on our game piece size plus the space here between that starting position. So to get that value, what we'll do is we're going to do our piece size. For our piece size, we need to create a variable for that. So what we'll do const piece size. And so this is just going to be 96. So that's basically, we have our 16 pixels for our original frame size, and that multiplied by 6. So then what we'll do is we'll do our piece size now that we have that variable, and we're going to add it to our piece size divided by 2. So we'll be moving 96 pixels over from here. So we'll get here, and then we need to take half that, get to here. Then we need to multiply this value by the number of spaces we need to move over. So we're going to multiply this by our Y coordinate. Actually, our X coordinate. So then what we need to do is we just need to copy this logic here, place this here, and then this would be our Y coordinate. So if we save, it looks like nothing changed in our game, which is great because we just passed in 0, 0. So in theory, what we should be able to do is update this value here, and we'll do 0, 1, and then we'll do 0, 2. All right, and so instead of filling up our row, we actually filled in our column. So what we need to do is we need to tweak some of our game logic. So when we create our X and Y positioning, we're treating these as a coordinate. So 0, 0, 0, 1. And so 0, 1 is really us moving over to the right instead of moving down. So to get that, we're just going to flip our X and Y values here. And this should move our game object over. And instead of 150 pixels, we're going to do 140. And then that way it gives us that same buffer between our horizontal line. All right, so now that we have our first row filled in, we need to create and fill in our second and our third rows. So we're going to copy this, and we'll change this to 1 for our X and our coordinate. And then we'll do the same thing here, but we'll use 2. All right, and so now we have all of our game pieces represented on our board. All right, so next we're going to go ahead and add in logic for interacting with our game objects and then toggling the frame that's shown on our image game objects. So to do this, the first thing we do is we're going to make a new variable. We'll call it piece, and we're going to assign it to our image game object that is created. Then, in order for us to register event handlers and interact with our game objects, we need to call the setInteractive method on our game object. And what this will do is it tells Phaser to allow the player to interact with this game object, and then we can register event handlers for specific events to run our game logic. So now that we've made our game object interactive, we need to go ahead and tell Phaser which event I want to listen to, and then what is the logic we want to run. So to do this, we're going to do piece once. Then we're going to go ahead and do phaser.input.events.pointerDown. And we'll go ahead and just type that to a string. Then we're going to go ahead and register our callback function. So this will be the function that runs when this event happens. And so for right now, we're just going to do a console log. And what we'll do is we'll just do our X and Y values for our coordinates, and we'll go ahead and save. So what we'll do is we'll come over to our browser. Let's go ahead and go into our developer console. So we'll come up here, we'll do console, and then we'll try clicking on one of our game objects. And we'll see right away our X and Y indexes are being logged when we click on our game object. However, when we try to click on that game object again, nothing happens. And so what's happening here is when you register your callback for a particular event, if you use the .once method, Phaser will guarantee that this will be a one-time event listener, and it will clean it up after it fires. If we just change this to on, what will happen is this will be an event listener that will constantly invoke our callback anytime this event happens. So that's something to keep in mind when you're making your game. So for our case, after a player clicks on a position, we don't want anyone else to be able to claim it, so we're just going to use once. All right, and so now we have our functionality for interacting with our game board. All right, with that logic in place, that brings it into this video. So in the next part of this series, we'll go ahead and start building out our basic Tic Tac Toe class, and then we'll connect that to our Phaser 3 game, and then that way we'll have a working prototype for Tic Tac Toe. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the content. For more great Phaser 3 content, please see the links on your screen now.